It is called Internet.
I use the World Wide Web information superhighway.
Cybersecurity. Why do things go viral?
Click here.
In cryptocurrency and law enforcement circles, Tigran Gambaryan is a bit of a legend. He was a special agent with the Internal Revenue Service, where he investigated financial crimes. But cryptocurrency crimes became his specialty. In fact, whenever there was a big Bitcoin case, he seemed to be a big part of it.
They've just announced an international cybercrime enforcement action. This is against the dark web marketplace Alphabet.
The takedown of the largest dark web child porn marketplace, named Welcome to Video, was operating
an online black market bazaar called Silk Road.
I interviewed Tigran about his work last year at a cryptocurrency conference in New York.
Please welcome to the stage Tigran Gambaryan and Dina Temple-Raston.
And I described him to the audience as a sort of accountant with a gun.
No, so we love being called accountants with guns.
Oh, good. I'm glad I started out well then.
He had an almost evangelist quality about him.
To me, blockchain is kind of the best of the both worlds. It empowers people, but at the same time, it allows exchange and law enforcement to actually play a big role in it and be able to identify these transactions.
What made him blockchain famous is that he figured out that an underlying assumption about blockchain just wasn't true. It isn't as anonymous as you might think. People assume that because crypto allowed cybercriminals to bypass the traditional banking system, it made their transactions and their crimes almost invisible, almost impossible to track.
When I started looking at cryptocurrency, I'm like, oh yeah, Bitcoin's traceable. And then from there, all these investigations just kind of came out.
Sure enough, Tigran was one of the people who had discovered you could look for patterns in the giant public ledger that keeps track of transactions and find patterns. And those patterns allowed you to trace a path from one Bitcoin transaction to a specific market, and from there to a specific wallet, and then a group of people, or maybe even one person. And suddenly, these Bitcoin transactions weren't these dark, shadowy things. They were traceable, which meant crimes were traceable. It completely revolutionized high-tech crime fighting, though Tigran was pretty modest about it.
There's nothing special about me or any of the work that I did. It was just, we were there first, and it was just the realization that this is actually doable.
A few years ago, in 2021, Tigran left the IRS and joined Binance, and he was basically doing the same thing he was doing before, flagging illegal behavior, talking to law enforcement, and cooperating in their investigations. But also, that evangelist quality in him made him determined to show the world that crypto wasn't just for cybercriminals, that it had great real-world uses too. And that was partly why he found himself on a plane in Nigeria last month.
He left on 24th, and he was supposed to be back on 27th.
This is Tigran's wife, Yuki. This is her first broadcast interview.
So he just packed a small bag, a couple of shirts and a suit?
Yes, it was just a carry-on luggage.
A month ago, Tigran and Binance's regional manager, a guy named Nadeem Anjawala, flew to the capital of Nigeria for what they thought would be a short trip. They were supposed to discuss a number of issues regulators had with the cryptocurrency platform. And then, on the first day of meetings, everything went south.
The executives were whisked away to a, quote, guest house operated by the Nigerian National Security Agency. The pair were stripped of their phones.
These two officials who are being held are essentially...
They were apprehended and have been held against their will in an undisclosed government location.
From Recorded Future News, I'm Dina Temple-Raston, and this is Click Here, a podcast about all things cyber and intelligence. We tell true stories about the people making and breaking our digital world. And today, inside a long-running dispute between Binance and Nigerian authorities. Nigeria is in its worst economic crisis in decades, and it's been accusing Binance of contributing to all that by manipulating the value of its currency. And now Tigran Gambaryan finds himself in the last place he'd ever expected, in the middle of a struggle between the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange and the Nigerian government. Stay with us.
Tigran is known still to this day as the Bitcoin wizard.
This is Matt Price. He was an agent with Tigran at the IRS, and they later started working together at Binance. After Tigran helped prove to law enforcement that blockchain was traceable, a coterie of crypto cops emerged. A bunch of them, like Tigran and Matt, left the government and joined private companies that were trying to take crypto mainstream.
Law enforcement works a huge variety of investigations. Some of those could be related to regulatory issues or issues with the exchanges themselves, but a large majority of what they're doing, particularly in the national security realm or in the trying to protect fraud victims realm, you can't do that without the cooperation of private sector companies.
They were still going after the bad guys, the North Korean hackers, the illicit drug markets, the money launderers. But now, they were doing it for private companies. And in a way, it was pretty inevitable that Tigran would end up working in Nigeria, because Nigeria has the second largest cryptocurrency adoption in the world, after India. Transactions last year in Nigeria alone topped 56.7 billion, according to Chainalysis, a company that tracks things like that. And Binance is thought to have some 13 million customers in Nigeria. And you could be forgiven for thinking Nigeria's embrace of crypto is inextricably linked to online scamming, which is a cottage industry there. But Matthew Page, a non-resident Africa scholar from Chatham House, the London-based think tank, says Nigerians love crypto for a much more pragmatic reason. It's a great hedge against inflation.
Having so many Nigerian friends who are struggling day to day, the real attraction of crypto is that when you are going to be certain that your country's currency is going to be worth less next week, next month, and next year, then putting it out of reach, putting it in a safe place, even if that place like crypto is actually quite volatile, it is still in a safer place than if it is in your own country's currency.
In fact, in developing economies around the world, ordinary people buy things that will hold their value as a way to stabilize their incomes. Traditionally, they bought US dollars, but now they load up on cryptocurrency because it's so easy to buy and sell. They don't have to go to some back alley with a fistful of cash. They just have to log on to a cryptocurrency platform from their mobile phones. And the most popular cryptocurrency platform in Nigeria? It's Binance.
Freedom of innovation. Freedom of money, freedom of choice. Exchange the world. Binance.
Being the top crypto market in Nigeria is obviously good news for their business, but it also has made Binance a target, and it appears maybe even a scapegoat, which is what Tigran and Nadeem seem to have gotten caught up in. There are two numbers that tell the story of the economic crisis in Nigeria. The first is inflation. It was up 30% in January from a year ago. 30. And in the first 3 months of 2024, the value of the Nigerian currency had fallen by 40%.
The Nigerian naira fell to record lows on both the official and unofficial markets Monday.
Official and unofficial markets. Binance is one of those unofficial markets. There are relatively straightforward explanations for both these problems, and neither one of them have much to do with cryptocurrency trading. The value of the naira started to decline after the Nigerian government announced in 2023 that it would end the currency's peg to the US dollar. At the time, the government said it wanted the market to set the rate, to let market forces prevail. But that appears to have been a mistake, and partly related to this second thing. Corruption in Nigeria is endemic. The watchdog group Transparency International indexes countries based on perceived corruption. Nigeria ranked 145th out of 180 countries, slightly worse than Russia and a little better than Iran. Matthew Page says there is
a legacy of economic mismanagement, grand corruption, monetary policy failures.
So market forces did prevail, just not in the way the government had hoped. It's important to note that Binance doesn't set an exchange rate for the Naira. It doesn't have a giant pool of Naira that could manipulate its value. Instead, it pairs buyers and sellers in peer-to-peer trading. The Naira's value is up to the two people in the transaction. But so many people are trading on the platform that its going rate for the Nigerian currency has become a kind of reference rate for the rest of the country. That's why the television news talks about both rates.
Naira fell to record lows on both the official and unofficial markets Monday.
The Nigerian government kept repeating the currency manipulation narrative until just this week, when they announced that they had charged Binance, Tigran, and Nadeem with 4 counts of tax evasion. They claimed Binance, which is unregulated in Nigeria, hadn't filed tax returns or paid value-added or corporate taxes.
So I think the Nigerian government really dug deep and pulled out the one set of charges they could really realistically levy against these individuals and the company at this time.
Not currency manipulation, the thing they had been going around and around on for months, but tax evasion.
It was the old Al Capone strategy, right? If you can't get them on anything else, get them on tax evasion. And that's the situation that we're in now.
So in some ways, Binance is a scapegoat?
I think that it's definitely a scapegoat. However, it's not obviously a perfectly innocent scapegoat.
We get into that when we come back. Stay with us.
You know, I talked to him before he left, and I was like, I didn't expect anything like this. I was just kind of like, Nigeria, shit, you know.
This is William Frenson. He was a prosecutor at the Department of Justice and worked on a lot of those epic cryptocurrency cases with Tigran, and they'd been friends ever since.
Did he think it was going to be a short trip, or was he worried?
No, he wasn't worried. I mean, Tigran and I often would talk about, you know, travel and stuff like that, and I think it was just kind of like, hey, what are you up to? And I got to go to Nigeria.
Here's what we've pieced together from family members, our own law enforcement sources, and local reports. That Monday morning, February 26th, Tigran and Nadeem sat down with various Nigerian officials, some from the central bank, others from the Nigerian Securities and Exchange Commission. And while the meetings started off as planned, they didn't seem to end well. Tigran and Nadeem were told other regulators wanted to meet with them, and the ones who showed up were hostile. So hostile that their discussion with Tigran and Nadeem ended with an unsettling announcement. The two needed to go back to their hotel to pack because they were being moved to a government guest house, into a kind of VIP detention. And then they were driven to a compound run by the Office of the National Security Advisor. Matthew Page, the Nigeria expert from Chatham House, said they're probably in a particular complex.
It's called Yellow House, I believe. But yeah, they have various sort of VIP detention facilities.
Explain that to me. What's a VIP detention facility?
I think there's sort of, there are 2 levels. It's either salubrious or, you know, really, really grim detention conditions. So it's basically like a bad motel room.
Who was behind the detention order is still unclear.
It's definitely something that is done sort of on the whim of powerful people like the president or the national security advisor, often without the courts weighing in. And even if they do weigh in,
whoever it was, what's clear now is that the way all this unfolded has gotten very out of hand.
I think that they have every right from a legal standpoint and a tax standpoint to hold this company accountable. But I think that, again, they've gone about it in the most sort of thuggish way possible.
Which brings us to the possible reason Nigeria focused on Binance in the first place. Last year, the U.S. Department of Justice charged Binance and its former CEO with a roster of financial crimes, including violating the Bank Secrecy Act and knowingly helping criminals launder and move their money. So it wasn't really a stretch for Nigeria to say it suspected some funny business too. And then there was this other thing. In addition to forcing Binance's founder to step down as CEO, Binance also had to pay a record $4.3 billion fine, which Matthew Page and others we talked to for this story said must have caught Nigeria's eye. If officials could slap a $1 billion fine for back taxes on Binance, it could be a temporary cure for much of what ails them.
So this is a well-worn tactic, and one which cash-strapped governments all over the world pursue when they're in a tough place. They think and act sort of criminally, and so they look to extort money and concessions from companies like this.
About 8 years ago, a South African telecom company got on the wrong side of the Nigerian government, and it was hit with a roster of multi-billion-dollar fines for allegedly repatriating money out of the country illegally. Last fall, a Singaporean agricultural supply company was accused of being mixed up in a $50 billion foreign exchange fraud operation. Those other businesses had brick-and-mortar assets in Nigeria, things like cell phone towers and palm oil farms, things that could be seized in lieu of back taxes. Because the Binance business is more ethereal, it's possible Nigeria is hanging on to company executives as a kind of collateral. Yuki, Tigran's wife, said that they've been talking and texting during his detention.
Like, what's he doing all day?
I think he's just sitting in a room.
Wow.
He's been reading, watching some TV, trying to work out.
Push-ups and sit-ups and stuff like that. But I think those are the only things he is basically allowed to do.
The people working the issue at Binance text him with updates.
He's just kind of sitting there waiting for them to do something?
Yeah, he's just sitting tight, which is really hard for him because he's a very antsy person.
A high-energy person stuck in a room surrounded by guards with very little information.
I'm worried about his mental state more than anything. And, you know, some days are good, but most days he just sounds very depressed. He says he feels hopeless. He says it feels like a nightmare he cannot wake up from. And I feel the same.
For Yuki, sitting in their suburban Georgia home with their 2 kids, waiting, it has just been brutal.
Oh, it's been the most exhausting, hardest days of my life, for sure. I still try to go about my days because life doesn't stop. I still have to take care of the kids, but it's getting harder and harder to stay positive and keep my spirits up.
Yuki's in limbo.
You have a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old, is that right?
Yeah, he's gonna be 5 in 2 weeks.
Are they asking? Where's Dad?
They are asking, yeah. They ask, you know, when he's coming back or why it's taking so long. You know, he does travel a lot, but he's never been away for this long before.
She says her daughter, the 10-year-old, knows something's up.
Did she ask you about it, or is she trying to be brave?
I think she wants to ask me, but she chooses not to because she's not ready to hear my answer.
If she asked you, do you know what you'd tell her?
I think I would just say that he is just not allowed to leave right now.
Binance has said that they are working with authorities to resolve the matter. Matthew Page from Chatham House says he thinks money is going to have to change hands, whether it's a fine or a payment of back taxes. He doesn't see Binance resolving this in any other way.
Until Binance Global ponies up some sort of payment to return him to his family, I think that is really the standoff, essentially, that has now crystallized. I think this could go on for months. I think this is a country with an enormous degree of stubbornness, staying power, and willingness to engage in brinksmanship.
And then there was this unexpected twist in the whole ordeal. On Saturday, just before the Nigerian tax authority announced the tax evasion charges, Nadeem asked his guards at the guest house if he could go to a nearby mosque for prayers. Nadeem is a Muslim, and it was the beginning of Ramadan. Allegedly, the guards accompanied him to the mosque, but somehow Nadeem just slipped away.
One of the two Binance executives detained in Nigeria for alleged tax evasion has reportedly escaped from custody.
Exactly how that happened is still unclear. Nigerian officials had taken both men's passports when they detained them, and when they confirmed the escape days later, they told local media Nadeem must have used his Kenyan passport to board a flight. Apparently, he's back in Kenya. And Tigran is on his own now, and since the escape, Yuki no longer has direct contact with her husband.
This case is very much a throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks type of situation.
And the things that seem to have stuck is that one of the Binance executives has fled, and all that's left for leverage is Tigran and these tax charges.
The standoff has now crystallized after the escape of one of the two detainees. It's clear that this is an enormous embarrassment for the Nigerian government. I think this could go on for months and years.
Early in March, before these most recent charges were filed, the BBC reported that a government minister had said Nigeria was going to levy a $10 billion fine against Binance as retribution for ruining the Nigerian economy. Days later, he insisted he'd been misunderstood. But it's very possible what the minister was doing was putting out an opening bid on just how much it'll take to get Tigran Gambaryan back home. This is Click Here. Here are some of the top cyber and intelligence stories of the past week.
Earlier today, the Department of Justice, joined by 15 states and the District of Columbia, sued Apple in the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey for violating Section 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act.
The Sherman Antitrust Act. It's an 1890 federal statute that prohibits activities that restrict interstate commerce and competition in the marketplace. And Apple is now in Attorney General Merrick Garland's crosshairs for violating it. The DOJ has filed an antitrust lawsuit against the tech company, charging it with creating a monopoly that makes it harder for users to quit their iPhones and for their rivals to create compatible apps and products, which, Garland says,
knowingly and deliberately degrades quality, privacy, and security for its users.
Consider what happens when an iPhone user gets a text from an Android phone. Not only is their text bubble green instead of blue, but
the conversation is not encrypted. Videos
Apple says it will fight the litigation and maintains that any alleged constraints on its software and hardware are actually intended to protect user security and privacy, not chain them to their iPhones. Also last week, Russia carried out one of the most massive airstrikes of the war when it targeted Ukrainian power stations and communications networks. Millions were without electricity and internet, and at least 5 people were killed.
It lit up and hit something very nearby. I can hear explosions still.
Moscow said the attack was retribution for Ukrainian violence during Russia's presidential election. And finally, On Thursday, the pixelated graphic of a tiny spaceship announced the takedown of a popular dark web marketplace called Nemesis. An animation on the dark market website showed the spaceship blowing up the Nemesis logo, video game style. When the digital smoke cleared, it revealed a QR code for the website of the German Federal Police. The cyber unit there seized Nemesis after conducting a nearly 2-year investigation of the site along with the US and Lithuania. They didn't say who dreamed up the video game motif, though law enforcement splash pages have been definitely getting more creative this year.
Today's episode was produced by Sean Powers, Kat Shooknecht, and me, Jade Abdul-Malik. It was edited by Karen Duffin, fact-checked by Darren Ancrum, and contains original music by Ben Livingston, with some other music from Blue Dot Sessions. Our staff writer is Lucas Riley, and our illustrator is Megan Goff. Click Here is a production of Recorded Future News. Tune in on Friday for Mic Drop, which features our favorite interview of the week, and we'll have a new episode of Click Here on Tuesday. See you then.